from the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Welcome to Broncos Country Tonight. We are joined in studio by Hall of Famer, Broncos Ring of Famer, Steve Atwater. What up, Steve?
What's going on, gentlemen?
It's good to have you here, man. And one of the things we were talking about on the show is optimism for the Broncos. Now, of course, if they trade for Aaron Rodgers, the optimism will be at all-time high.
You can't be bringing up daggone Aaron Rodgers, man. He's still with another team.
Listen, I'm just saying, if that
Ryan
happens...
Edwards is tampering right now.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, seriously, they're all listening to me, and they're like, you got to be kidding me. Now, listen, I think there's still plenty of things to be optimistic regardless. We can talk about the expected improved health. I think they're going to get better with their turnover margin because you could only go up from where you were dead last in the NFL. And then finally, they also projected have the fifth easiest schedule. So which of those options gives you the most optimism?
Improve health. Bar none. I mean, that's the clear top of the line choice for me because we know we have a talented roster. We knew that going into the season last year. Now, having those guys back, even if they may not be 100, they may be like Bradley Chubb was last year, probably 95%. Guess what? Chubb going to be 100 this year. He's going to be ready to go. Von Miller, hopefully, he's going to be 100% ready to go. Cortland Sutton, come on, man. You know, and I saw Cortland out there running around, man, looking good. So, I'm excited mostly about him being healthy.
That was the first answer that I went with, but I changed my answer to turnover margin because ultimately I don't really care who's out there making the catches and touchdowns and turning the football over. I don't care if Drew Lock is throwing to Deshaun Hamilton 30 touchdowns a year. You know, like if they're scoring touchdowns and Caden Stearns is picking the ball off, I don't really care about the health as long as they're making the plays.
No, you're right, but some players make more plays than others.
Some players do make more plays than others.
Well, interestingly enough, Improved Health was winning this poll for a very long time. It just overnight turned over to defensive depth is actually now winning this poll. What does that say to you?
Yeah, well, we do have great depth on the defense, and, you know, I would imagine that how healthy those guys stay, especially the guys who are playing at elite levels, hey, the better our record is going to be and the better it's going to be for Broncos country. But if we have 5-6 guys go down again, hey, guess what? That means nothing.
Okay. Going back to the turnover margin, I'm with Ben on this one because Warren Sharp kind of put this out there.
What's wrong?
We're both pounding the table on the show like it has to be turnover margin.
We look at the poll and we're like, we suck.
Wow, terrible. But he went through and looked at over the last 2 years, games losing the turnover battle. So 32 games. The Broncos lost 15 games. Well, there's 15 games in there they lost turnover the battle. I'm assuming they lost those games. I mean, more than often than not. Yeah. That was basically right in the top three. Philadelphia was 17. There's a logjam of 6 teams at 16, and then the Broncos are at 15 games where they lost the turnover battle. So you think about last couple of years, you only won 12 games. It certainly would seem to say, logically, that winning the turnover battle might help you out.
Yeah, but that's the effect. The cause is the players, the playmakers being on the field. And when you got the playmakers healthy and ready to play, guess what? You're going to have more turnovers. You're going to have more sacks. You're going to win more football games.
I'm with you. I don't personally care if it's A.J. Bouye or Parnell Motley out there making the interception as long as they're making the interception.
Meanwhile, check this out, though. Baltimore, 6. Buffalo, New Orleans. These are all playoff teams. 7. Kansas City, Pittsburgh, Seattle, New England, Green Bay, Tennessee. Those are all the single-digit teams losing the turnover battle. How many times they've lost the turnover battle. Those are all playoff teams. So if you want to be – I know these are not things that are just apples to apples, but I'm just saying this is an example of where you can say, okay, winning the turnover battle does equate to wins, and is that not what's important this year specifically for the Broncos as they're trying to dig their way out of this?
No, I definitely agree with it, but when you – put it on the scale of what's more important, I would say keeping the guys healthy because if you keep the guys healthy, you're going to get the turnovers, I believe. But if you're just saying, all right, regardless of who we have on the field, we're going to get a bunch of turnovers, and it's not going to happen.
Okay, Ben, how do you match that with talent, though? So, like, just keeping guys healthy versus having a talented roster because we've had examples of the Broncos being really good at turnovers, and talent was kind of go either way.
Well,
you've never had a good team where you've got a bunch of turnovers and you've got a bunch of average players.
Well, how much is that scheme dependent then? Like, let me ask you this. Like, how much does scheme matter in any of this?
Scheme is a big part of it, but you ask any coach, the better players you have, the better the coach is.
Spoken like a former player. No, but I mean, you're right, though. It is. The better players make a scheme better, period. Like, it does. There's a symbiotic relationship there, but you err on the side of Jimmy's and Joe's, right? And so I think at the end of the day, better players is always going to make a better scheme even better. I think we're looking at this backwards, though. We're talking about the generation and acquiring of turnovers with better players. What about the player you have cutting down on their turnovers? Melvin Gordon, fewer fumbles. Drew Lock, fewer interceptions. That's another part of the turnover margin that we're not looking at right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And, as a quarterback, learning a new offense last year, I believe that played a part in it. He was in one offense his rookie year, another offense this last year. So, going into his second year with this, I think we'll get a much better idea of the type of quarterback he'll be because, hey, normally – first season, any rookie quarterback, you give him a pass on it. Mm-hmm. Now there are some anomalies. You have to have the Justin Herberts, the guys who come out and play really well their first year. But for the most part, a lot of great quarterbacks, they struggled their first year or two. And so, I have to give Drew Lock a pass on that. But, hey, now it's time to put up now.
We gave Ryan Edwards a pass on his Carpenter jeans in his first game, too. So.
Yeah, and his pass, too. His pass from the
Why do you have to bring that in?
I'm trying to get it on the TV show.
Completely unrelated. I know, exactly. You're just doing that so it's on the TV show. But I love your point about the offense. And because of turnover margin, we're talking about the Broncos defense needing to improve that. They were 29th in the league in getting turnovers. Yeah. But the Broncos were dead last in giving up the ball. And so that has to change, no question about it, this year. And where would you go about making that the priority for, like, who is that responsible for? Is that the quarterback? Is that the running back? Is that the offensive coordinator? How does that get coached?
I mean, when you look at it, in the big scheme of things, how many fumbles did Melvin Gordon have? He had under 3 or 4 fumbles. Everyone is too many, but in the big scheme of things, that's not a lot when you look at the total number of turnovers that we had. So I would say absolutely, it's on the quarterbacks and on the receivers and the offensive line to make sure we're on the same page. You got to protect the quarterback, and the quarterback's got to throw accurate passes. And then, hey, when receivers have a chance to catch it, they got to catch it. You can't tip it up.
Mm-hmm. Steve, it's good having you in studio, man.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, man.
All right. When we come back, Warren Sharp also went and took a look at quarterback efficiency in a very unique manner. We'll get to it next.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. Here are Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
All right, welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. Thank you to Steve Atwater for joining us in the previous segment. I wanted to get into a little exercise that Warren Sharp did on Twitter the other day, and you can find him at Sharp Football. And he took passing touchdowns, rushing touchdowns, and subtracted out interceptions and sacks. So I don't know if you ever remembered or played this game in golf. We used to do the Hogan scoring. It's Ben Hogan. And it would basically promote the idea of hitting fairways and greens. Greens regulation, hitting fairways, doing the simple things. You get bonus points for that. Right. And if you don't get to green regulation, you don't get those points. So this is kind of like what this exercise strikes me as is, hey, if you score touchdowns, if you take sacks, it's going to kind of balance those things out. I thought this was kind of fascinating because there was only 4 players since 2018 to actually have a positive score in this passing, rushing, touchdown minus interceptions and sacks.
Does this include fumbles or it's just sacks?
This does not include fumbles. He did include fumbles a little later on in an example of this. Most of those numbers obviously skew significantly worse because it's total fumbles, not even just fumbles lost. Okay. But since 2018... And I thought that would be interesting to take a look at the elite quarterbacks in the league versus the ones that are kind of middle of the pack or even trending towards, and then where the Broncos quarterbacks currently are. So no surprise here. Drew Brees, Patrick Mahomes, Ben Roethlisberger, Tom Brady, and Lamar Jackson. So actually it's 5 because Tom Brady and Lamar Jackson are tied with 1. What does that tell you, at least on a very simple scale, what we're trying to prove here?
Well, it tells me that elite quarterbacks get rid of the football and don't take sacks. First of all. Second of all, it tells me that Baltimore Ravens have an incredible offensive line.
Right.
But, you look at those guys, and I bet you their time to throw is incredibly low with the exception of the hyper-athletic guys that are buying time. Now, conversely, if you were to look at those numbers, I would bet, and I've talked about this before, that Deshaun Watson would be at or near the bottom.
He is.
And so that's, because his time to throw is very long. So some guys buy time with their legs and are able to get rid of the football, and some guys aren't. And Deshaun's one of those guys that kind of actually isn't. So What does that tell me? Good quarterbacks get rid of the football quickly. That's what it tells me.
Even Aaron Rodgers is negative on this scorecard here.
He buy time with his legs, though. The Green Bay offense for a long time was deep developing ISO routes when Mike McCarthy was there.
Right.
He would buy time with his legs. So I'm not surprised by that number as much. Like, you would figure Tom Brady, Drew Brees would be at the top of this list.
Yep.
You'd figure Mahomes would be in the conversation. What was the other name I'm missing there?
Tom Brady, Lamar Jackson, Ben Roethlisberger.
That's one that surprises me a little bit
because he
used to be. Yeah, he does hold the ball, but that also tells you Pittsburgh's offensive line is very good, and we know that. So, or at least it was during that span.
Right. So I'm just going to give you a few names here on where their scores. So those were the only 5 guys that were positive. Aaron Rodgers is negative 11. So again, passing touchdowns, rushing touchdowns.
Where does that rank?
That is, fifth. I mean, sixth, I guess, sixth here because Tom Brady and Lamar Jackson.
Okay. So fifth or sixth on the list. He's right. Yeah, he's right outside the top.
There.
Yeah, makes sense.
Ryan Tannehill's 29, minus 29.
Where does he rank on the list?
He's the next one. I'm going in order.
Okay.
I'm going in order here.
That makes a lot of sense, although he does, that line is not very good, so I would suggest that sacks probably tanked his score.
Josh Allen is minus 31.
That makes a lot of sense. He didn't throw for a lot of touchdowns. They settled for a lot of field goals, and that line was bad the first couple of years he played.
Interestingly enough, his passing touchdowns, his rushing touchdowns exactly equal the amount of sacks he has taken, 92.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Kind of fascinating over a 3-year period that is the exact amount. Now, again, sacks are not always a function of the quarterback. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But we can watch the game, and we can see instances where the quarterback is holding the ball too long, trying to do too much, and ends up taking the sack.
Well, the difference between Brett Rippon in the Jets game and Jeff Driscoll in the Bucs game last year, you could see the difference in holding. In fact, you could see the difference in the Tampa game when Brett got the last drive, the difference in holding the ball too long and getting it out quickly.
Just to go over some of the guys for the bottom of this list, Sam Darnold's minus 87. Deshaun Watson minus 83.
Bad line plus holds the ball too long.
Carson Wentz is minus 77, and Matt Ryan is minus 70. So there's some starting caliber quarterbacks in there.
Matt Ryan one fascinates me because he's a get rid of the ball quick guy, but that indicates bad line.
By the way, if you include fumbles, just because you were asking, Carson Wentz is minus 112, Deshaun Watson minus 110, Sam Darnold minus 107, Daniel Jones minus 96. Whew. So, but again, just on a simple level, you see the elite guys show up. They don't take a lot of sacks. Don't throw a lot of picks, and they balance it out. If nothing else, they balance it out with the amount of touchdowns. Now to the Broncos here. So we can take a look at Drew Lock, and we take a look at Teddy Bridgewater. Drew Lock is minus 16. Now, he hasn't been in the league since 2018, but since he's been in the league, he is minus 16.
That's not a bad number.
Comparative, when you're talking about Josh Allen at minus 31 and some of these other quarterbacks, you think, okay, well, minus 16, maybe there's something to work with. Remember, he came in those first 5 games, didn't take a lot of sacks, didn't have a ton of production. What was it, 7 touchdowns, 3 picks, I think, out of those first 5 games, but he didn't take a lot of sacks, and that helped him a little bit. He took more last year, needs to improve on that, but he's minus 16, and Teddy Bridgewater is minus 29 in that time. But again, if you're going kind of the simplified approach here, we keep saying Teddy Bridgewater is the safe option, but there are things that Teddy Bridgewater has done, including taking sacks, including turning the ball over, something you've talked about quite a bit, that would lead you to believe, well, it's not quite the safe option that you ultimately think he is if we're just going off this kind of basic scorecard.
Yeah, I think that the metric that's missing from this, and I think this is actually a valuable number, but I think the metric that's missing here is points per drive. Even if these guys are taking negative plays, how many can bail them out? Aaron Rodgers, Pat Mahomes, those guys are bailing you out of negative plays. Teddy Bridgewater, Drew Lock, those guys are not. Although Drew has at times.
Yes.
Teddy's not bailing you out of negative plays. So I'd be interested to see what the points per drive from these quarterbacks were in that span of time and kind of go from there. Because there's some quarterbacks that are just capable of doing that. They're capable of overcoming those circumstances. The Broncos are not a team that's really capable of that very often. We've seen Drew do it. We saw some big third down plays, and that kind of stuff, but he's not been consistent enough, and that's been a problem. He's got to cut the turnovers down and be consistent on those things, and he could be something. But that number is fascinating. I want to get more into that.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun little metric to play around with. There's metrics all over the place, but this one's a very simple one. And for the people that are say, well, should sacks be really tied into all this on the same paring as a turnover? Sometimes they are. Sometimes a bad sack takes you out of scoring range. Sometimes a bad sack ends a drive. So sacks are a big deal, and they are important as it relates to the way we ultimately measure these quarterbacks, sometimes on the quarterback, sometimes on the offensive line. But the fact remains, if you get the ball out fast, we saw that with some of the elite guys, you get the ball out fast, you can be a quarterback and you can be a team that functions at a very high level. When we come back, we're going to talk about the latest news with the Broncos offensive tackle, their right tackle. They signed a guy. We'll tell you who is next.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. Here are Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. The Broncos have signed an offensive tackle, Ryan Pope, an undrafted player out of San Diego State from 2019. Last year was with the Packers. A lot of people are taking a little bit of some fun leaps with the fact that he was from the Packers, but I don't know if this is necessarily a guy that didn't actually play any snaps for the Packers is going to necessarily lure Aaron Rodgers here. But let's go ahead and talk about Ryan Pope, 6'7", 315 pounds. This sort of strikes me a bit as a Calvin Anderson type signing. A guy that you're going to invest in, you're going to work and develop, but isn't necessarily the replacement for Juwan James.
Well, right. And obviously this is a shot in the dark at a guy who's a developmental type. This is not, any type of guy you're throwing out there to be a starter right away. And, they've got an undrafted guy, Drew Himmelman, as well, that, they're looking into options and developmental guys, and they've got the right coach to be able to develop them, Mike Munchak. That doesn't mean that you've stopped your search for a starter. Obviously, with Cam Fleming and Dennis Kelly and Bobby Massey, there's still other options out there that they're looking at. But I think it's a good idea to bring somebody like that in. Maybe it gives you a chance to pick the brain of somebody who was a teammate of Aaron Rodgers for a minute, and maybe see if you can figure some things out.
You mentioned Dennis Kelly, Bobby Massey, who we did know the Broncos were going to take a look at, and Cam Fleming was a name added today, or at least this week. What does that mean to you? Just casting a wide net?
I mean, they're looking for a certain type there. All three of those guys are kind of a certain type. Massey's a little less athletic than the other two. We talked about all three of those actually last week on Logan and Lewis, and I guess all three names are out there now. But it was Dennis Kelly, I think, is the guy that's kind of favored. 0 sacks given up last year, and probably fits the scheme a little bit better. Massey has a relationship with Fangio dating back to Chicago, and Cam Fleming is the most athletic of the three, but has had some issues, since he's come into the league. So I think what it says is the Broncos are looking for guys that that have starting experience and can start, and they want to see if they can get a guy that fits what they're trying to do, that they can plug in there. Now that Juwan James is obviously not going to be there for the season.
I mean, the timing for the Broncos, I guess, here is somewhat favorable because you have some time. Time is on your side to find a right tackle. Of course, you would love to have this information before the draft. Maybe that would have shifted some things, but we're past that now. Now you have to look at, okay, well, we're here in May. At least you can make this decision before you get to training camp, which last time they found out they were going to have Juwan James was last year when he decided to opt out right before training camp. So at least in this case, you have an opportunity to try out several of these guys. You might even bring in several guys and just see how the competition goes. There's a lot of names that are out there. I still think Dennis Kelly would make a lot of sense here.
Yeah, I think to me that's the one that assuming that he passes his workouts and passes his medicals, that's the one. Like I said, there are other names here. Massey obviously has the relationship with Fangio, and that's not nothing. And then Fleming's kind of the wild card here. He's the most athletic of the three, and they've kind of lacked that athleticism at the right tackle position. They had DeMar Dotson last year, but they were unable to run screens to that side, which Pat Shurmur loves to do. He loves to run the running back screen, the tight end screen to that side. They were unable to do that because Dotson simply lacked the athleticism to get out in space and create those blocks. So, maybe getting a guy like Fleming allows you to be a little bit more versatile in offense this year.
It feels like another day, another rumor we have to sort of shoot down here, but Pro Football Talk was reporting that the Broncos are planning on starting Dalton Reisner at right tackle, depending on how this all shakes out.
That is not true.
You've been saying all along that that's just not really in the plan, and I don't understand from just a logical standpoint of why take a risk and potentially weaken an already strong spot on your offensive line.
Yeah, you just don't do that. You don't take one area of strength and turn it into an area of weakness to turn another area that's a question mark into another question mark. Dalton Reisner was drafted to be a guard in this league because he lacked the athleticism to play right tackle at the NFL level. He actually started at K-State at center. He was an interior lineman who kicked out because they needed it, and he's just kind of stayed out there because he was good enough at what he did. But, you can get away with some of those things in college. Sometimes right tackles in college need to move inside and become guard because they lack the ability to get into their kick slide quick enough and be those kind of pass protectors. So, I think having Reisner next to Bowles has also been a good thing. There's been continuity over there. So from everything I understand, that would be a last case, breaking case of glass, emergency type issue, and not something that is in the plan. It's not the first, second, or third option here.
Coming back to Ryan Pope here for a minute, I've noticed something early on here with Mike Munchak. He really does kind of like these guys that he identifies as project. Alejandro Villanueva was a perfect example of a guy that he brought in. He just sort of worked and then turned him into a starting caliber offensive tackle and a premier guy. And Calvin Anderson right now is kind of one of the next guys up. Remember, they poached him off the Jets practice squad. Came in here. He's been kind of hanging out for a couple of years. He got a chance to start against Carolina. Got a chance later on in the season to play a little bit. And now he was coming into the season projected as your swing offensive tackle. I just sort of like the way that Mike Munchak has approached this position, or at least when he's been in the building, when he's talked front offices into, is give me some guys that I can work with, that I see something in them, and let's not count on them right away. Don't bring them in with any kind of anticipation. It's good to have depth, even if it's not depth you're necessarily using right away.
Well, he turned Elijah Wilkinson from a guard into a tackle and was able to get productivity out of him. Elijah, played hurt a lot, and that kind of hurt him a little bit. He struggled with speed rushers, but he turned Elijah into something. And you look and you see some of these guys are bringing in, Tiny Moody, Quinn Minard. There's a lot of hope that those guys could be something. Munchak's a Hall of Famer for a reason. Yeah,
and he certainly proved to be a Hall of Famer as an offensive line coach as well, at least so far. All right, that does it for us. Thank you to Steve Atwater for joining us earlier. For Benjamin Allbright, I'm Ryan Edwards. Thank you for watching Broncos Country Tonight.
Thanks for watching Broncos Country Tonight. Tune in to Broncos TV every weeknight at 6:30, right here on KTVD Channel 20.